point. Last time when I said, suppose there is a factory employing a laborer for $12 an hour. Then there is a factory that is employing for $10 an hour. And the worker go from here, moves to that one. Is that one? Get a better pay. And I said, you know, by doing so, really, it becomes more efficient. Remember? So some of you thought, that's counterintuitive. Looks like it should go less efficient. Because employer, say, let's call it employer A, employer B, and A is paying more than A is paying. Do you remember that one? I think I should explain this one a little more, but you should understand this very important. Suppose these two factories are making shoes. And they are making shoes and they are selling the shoes for $60 a pair. Both factories. Both of them. And in this factory, you see, they now assuming that labor is the only cost. That's simple. To do so, that means 5 hours. Labor has to work to produce that. And in this factory, it's 6 hours. 5 and 6. That's the only way they can compete. That means a laborer who works here 6 hours, by the time they get there, he can do the same thing by 5 hours. That's why his labor becomes more efficient. Do you follow that one? Do you?
Assuming that there's a fundamental difference in the work, or?
No, it's the same guy.
He's more productive.
In other words, he's more productive in this factory than over here.
Says who? Right.
Now hold one second. You see? Here's Mr. Brian, I have a question. You assume, as far here is I see Brian, he's a poor laborer. And you have this idea. Do you know whether I work here or work there, my 1 hour is the same my 1 over there. I'm doing the same thing. Why in the world I can do more here than over here? I'm just putting 1 hour, same 1 hour.
Same shoes.
Huh?
Same shoes, right?
What's that?
The same shoes.
Same shoes, yeah. This is what I remind. By the way, you know, this is the basic premise for Marx's labor theory. According to Marx, all values come out of labor. And if I have 5 hours of labor, then that's 5 times 12. That's the value. Then what the bourgeoisie does? Well, here's a labor, and he produced this much. Brian over here. But you need only that much to survive. So this is excess. That's the surplus labor. Surplus value. That he's going to employ, going to take it away and convert it into his capital. Therefore, the capital is really coming from labor, and that's taken away. That's exactly what you mean by alienation. This is the basic theory underlying Marx's theory of value and alienation. And alienation is a very technical term. Later you'll be using the word exploitation. Exploitation is a loaded word, but alienation is very, very subtle. But let's go back again here, okay, Brian, you see? You're working here and you work here. My 1 hour is the same thing in either factory. But the truth of the matter is that this factory is much more efficient. Therefore, this can make more out of your labor than the other factory. That's why they can pay you more. Since your labor becomes more efficient, it's more productive, that's why when you move here, your productivity goes up, that's more efficient. And I'll give you one more example. You don't believe this stuff. And this is, I'm explaining this one because this is the basic point you have to understand in what Marx will talk about. When Japanese Toyota was making wonderful cars, and GM was having tough trouble. And they found out, the economists already found out, what's the product design in Japanese factory and Toyota factory and GM. And here's the GM. Do you know how many hours they were making per car? 42 labor hours. Toyota, they were doing it the same for 17 hours. Now you wonder, you begin to see why they can still cheaper. So where does that difference come from? It's called production engineering. By production engineering, when you open up your hood, under the hood, you see so many parts in one engine. And as they come along, you have to put them together. They assembly now. And if you are inefficient, you can have so many parts of one part, and so many, they don't match up. So some of them you have excess capacity in one part, and sometimes they have a deficient capacity for another one. Then you may be working all the time, a whole combination depending on it, and you will be spending a lot of time, a lot of energy, and accomplishing very little. And Japanese just accept. Just imagine that difference of 42 hours and 17 hours. That's not the only thing. It's not only 17 hours, but the more important difference between Toyota and GM was that the quality of the product was immense. GM cars, they were just breaking down all over, and they had to call recall. Have you ever seen those recall notices? Japanese, do you ever hear of Japanese car recall notice? No.
Doesn't that have to do with design more than production?
Well, I'm telling you, the design, when you talk about design, that's a very, very ambiguous word. Design of the car does not, Andrea thought, design of the car really determines the quality of the car, not necessarily at all.
I would say it's a more
Which I'm sure it can be. But usually the quality of the car, you have trouble or not, is not so much the design. Design, they come out of the designing board by design engineers. There's not that much difference. Really comes from the quality control. In factory, it's a very important role, quality control. All right. In other words, according to Marx, now this is the whole idea. This is the difference. You know, I tell you, this is really the labor, and all the values comes labor, and the same amount of labor, and same hour of labor, should have the same value. And this is one of the basic flaw, very important flaw in Marx theory. But as far as this theory is concerned, surely there is surplus capacity, and you take away that part, and that's exactly what you mean. You don't want to say alienation. That's what's called a profit. But according to Marx, you see, any employer can do it. But the truth of that, in competition, you cannot do that. Because if that happens, this has to close down. No way he can make a profit. So this is again the difference between Marx and true capitalist economy. But let's go back. All right, let's go back to this market problem. Market really develops three stages. Originally, it's a local market. Just you have Austin. You know, in the old days, Austin, even the big city, it's a very small town. And then you become a national market. And I told you that national market emerges. When the national market emerges, the nation state forms. That's why feudalism breaks down. You remember? The local market is a feudal market. Feudal market protects itself by the barrier of tariffs, customs. Do you remember how the Independence War began? All those tea parties, Boston Tea Party, the whole bunch of customs and tariffs is a protective privilege. And then it moves on the national market. By the time national market, local barriers are gone. But still you remain is the national barriers. the national barriers still obtain not only on national boundary, then by the time they extend to all over the world, then you say, here's the English bloc, and here's the Dutch, Dutch went there, Indonesia, all Indonesia, and here's Belgian bloc, and here's French bloc, and goes on. And then finally, even international stage really has two stages. By the time international stage, you maintain the national market and the tariffs, and that was exactly why Japan got mad and had to have a war. This is why First World War was essentially the market war. Imperial nations, they are fighting over the market. And First World War never really concludes the whole business. That's why it ends with armistice. It's not really end of war. And the Second World War is reopening the old battle. But after the Second World War, it becomes different. It's no longer national barriers, but it becomes a truly global market. That Toyota comes over, sell in Japan, in America. And I often thought, do you realize when Japan was protecting her market by her navy, mighty army, now compare the market that she takes up in Europe, in America, her market is much bigger than the market she tried to protect with her military power. This is the model. Isn't that fantastic? Mm-hmm. This is of course true of German market too. All right, so that's the stage. Then let's consider one more point. But in the meantime, now let's look at the Soviet scenario. The Soviet scenario is very simple. Communism. All right, communism is bourgeoisie, they take away our social standing, and there's huge capital becoming bigger and bigger all over. And do you know, by the way, that is the alien means that to the laborer, this capital becomes alien force, oppressive force. You have no control over. Alien force is the force you have no control over. So hence the solution is very simple. We'll overthrow the bourgeoisie, and this is appropriate. Alienation offers was appropriate. Dispossess the bourgeoisie and make this one your own takeovers. And this is the proletarian revolution. And proletarian revolution is going to produce a proletarian utopia. It's a paradise. If we will labor, there will be no more labor that will be exploited, because after all, the bourgeoisies are all gone. And capital was the source of exploitation, and capital has been appropriated by the working class. Right? All right. I'm going to read this ability. The great bestseller in my college days. It's called New Class by Gillas. He was a Yugoslavian communist. You guys don't know, because it's a sensational bestseller in my college days. And here I did read a few things. And when we read that German ideology, and that was written in 1841, 44, 45, wasn't that right?
1845.
Yeah, 45. And that's the time, you see? This is the time. That's the time. That was the height of industrial revolution. Height of industrial revolution. All right. So please read this quotation here, right there.
This quotation.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Slowly, all right?
When Ingles visited Manchester in 1844,
that was just 1 year before that German ideology. Yeah.
He found 350,000 workers crushed and crowded into damp, dirty, broken down houses where they breathed an atmosphere resembling a mixture of water and coal. In the mines, he saw half-naked women who were treated like the lowest of draft animals. Children spent the day in dark tunnels where they were employed in opening and closing the primitive openings for ventilation and in other difficult tasks. In the lace industry, exploitation reached such a point that 4-year-old children worked for virtually no pay.
And the working condition in America was not much better. and look at the whole steel town, Allegheny, and the people work the iron ore. Lots of Irish immigrants, Italians work there, and every year thousands of people died from the hazardous working conditions. The mine just collapsed. See, this is not only typical place to work, but it's very hazardous in those days. Just you can easily kill the maimed. But if you get maimed, there's no insurance. Employee doesn't never look after. Maimed worker is just like a crippled car. It's only suit only fit for extermination. But for the cow, thank God, there is an exterminator. But for the maimed worker, there is no exterminator. They have to suffer through. This is the condition. And surely, under those conditions, to talk about the oppressive power of capital and revolution is absolutely, that makes sense. But this book we talk about the new class is that what happens after the revolution. And Gillas is saying that unfortunately it didn't bring about any liberation of the working class at all. This is the saddest part. Why? Because you have a new class, new ruling class. When new ruling class comes up, and in Soviet Russia, they enjoy the greater privilege than even bourgeoisie in America or England. Why? Because they have a combination of not only wealth, but power. That's the new class. And what was amazing, I remember way back, I was under communist regime for 2 years. When I was in the newspaper, one of the big news they gave on the international side was the number of strikes that going on in England and America. It's amazing how they pick up. Just even a small field in a small town, just pick up hundreds of strike stories. And they said, display this one. Look how unhappy they are, how exploited they are, and so on. Then how about their laborers? Oh, our laborers have no reason to complain at all because after they are the ruling class, you see, they are so happy. But the truth of the matter is that they never had allowed even to have their own labor organization. What was that man who organized the Yugoslavia labor organization for themselves? The one who became. Yeah, what's that? Yeah, Lech Walesa.
Solidarity.
Yeah. What's his, how do you?
In Poland, you mean?
Yeah, Poland.
In Poland.
Yeah,
Lech
Poland.
Walesa. Lech Walesa.
Yeah, Lech Walesa. See, then he is, by this, a daring move. They are the communist, they have their labor union, because that he really organized a labor union for the labor, and that was a terribly risky move to do it, but he succeeded. And that was one problem. See, one problem is that they could control that the new class comes in power. They enjoy all the privileges, and they never allow anybody to know what's going on where. And moreover, the free economy is replaced by command economy. Now they have two problems. One is, how do we really make them know, make them believe that they are living in the communist paradise? This is very important because they have to convince the people that they are living in a paradise. And today's newspaper, it's an example, New York Times. I just read in New York Times that North Korea is having a tough time. It's the poorest country in the whole world. But he said in the New York Times says that North Korea government tells their people that their country is wealthier than South Korea. And in the past few years, the U.S. gave a lot of millions of tons of grain because North Korea is suffering from famine. Do you know how they told the people? U.S. is giving those wonderful grain as a tribute to a great country, our country. It's a tribute. It's a humble tribute from I mean, there's no way to disbelieve it because that's the only source of information. It's a tribute coming from there, Yeah, it's today's issue.
It's today's?
Yeah. Maybe, yeah. No, you don't have to show you later, okay?
Okay. I thought you wanted to look at it. All right.
Yeah. No, I done. And that was one thing. See, this is the whole idea of control. In other words, control, which becomes total. This is the so-called totalitarian control. Then the next problem, real problem, came with on the economic side. That is, during the Cold War, that means after the Second World War. Do you know the whole Cold War, we call it Cold War because it's not a hot war. A hot war, which means we use artillery. And we don't use artillery, therefore it's called Cold War. But do you know Cold War is the war that we don't use military weapons. It's a negative description. Do you know what's the real description going on between the two blocks during the Cold War? You guys don't know, do you? You are not saying so. You guys don't know. The real war was it was an economic war. Not cake, you know what I mean by that? It's very simple. So according to Marx, if we get rid of all that capitalism and bourgeoisie, then we set up the communist utopia. Nobody exploit. The laborers around will be happy. They will not simply borrow, they will not simply work for the terrible meager wage, being enslaved, but they will work for the glory and honor of the country. So they will be more productive. That's understandable, isn't it? After all, it's like a southern plantation. During the southern plantation, black people were slaves. Just imagine that the slaves were given now their own farm to cultivate. Don't you think also much better? That was the idea. Now the laborers are becoming the owner of the day. Therefore, they should be much happier and much more productive. And this was a prediction. And Khrushchev made a prediction. In fact, we'll bury you. That's what they said. That was before you guys were born. Why? Because we'll be so much productive. Our country will be so much happier. All the people in the United States and England, they will not be emigrate to Russia. Yo, that should be so. It should be the case. Shouldn't it not? Do you know what happened? What happened? Was exactly opposite. The productivity really in America goes up, Japan goes up, but in Soviet Russia it keeps going down. Therefore, now you see the Cold War we talk about, and by the time the Russian Empire really dissolved, that's the way the Cold War was finished, because bourgeoisie, capitalism won the Cold War. So, put it another way, Russia just lost the Cold War. In other words, if anyone, like most of you in fact, during the Cold War, I suppose you guys don't know very much Cold War because you're still too young. Maybe some of you still remember. But most people during the Cold War, they were primarily concerned with the saber rattling. But what they should have paid attention is what's happening in the factories. Because that's where the Cold War was fought. Then how in the world the Cold War really became a success story for the bourgeoisie? Well, it's very simple. Just imagine that the capitalism stayed on that level, nationalistic. Even when market became globalized. Then this was exactly what Marx predicted. Marx predicted is again very, very highly rational prediction. In a free market, huge market, you begin with many sellers and huge number of sellers and buyers. This is called, you may have heard, atomic competition. Atomic competition means that no one seller or buyer has any size of influence on the market. In other words, suppose you go buy a grocery. The fact that you buy a grocery one night, would it make any difference on the price level? No, it doesn't. That's exactly the condition of atomic market. Or free competition, or atomic competition. But atomic competition eventually is going to weed out weak ones, and it becomes small. Number of the remaining surviving competitors will be fewer and fewer. When you have only 2, 3 left, it's called oligarchy. When you have only 1 left, it's called monopoly. But as soon as monopoly comes up, there's no more competition. And according to the free market, do you remember efficiency was promoted by competition? And by the time you have a monopoly market or the oligopoly market, then the competition is no longer there. Therefore, there can be no more progress in the productivity. This is Marxism. And that's airtight. In fact, that was exactly what was happening in American motor industry, GM and Ford in 1950s. Why? They had a wonderful monopoly. In fact, they had control of the whole market. That you should read some of the stories of the 1950s. They had a whole, it's called, what was the highest floor of the GM building? Headquarters was it's called 5th floor or something like that. Well, all day long, they didn't do anything. Just they had a big party. Big problem. The only thing they changed, you know what they said? They changed simply the body style. Inside, engine, anything else? No, we never changed it. Just tail fin?
Tail fins, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. You gotta change it because if you don't change it, the American buyer won't trade in their 2-year-old cars. But if you change that one, they say, I'm getting outmoded. That's about all they did. So if you left alone, if you keep the national values there, and the GMs GMs would have gone really to the dogs.
They did better than that, though.
What's that?
The GM not only did exactly what you're saying, they also let visitors from Japan come in to see how they did it. Because the people in Japan, they said, you guys will make the small little cars for people on the periphery. We'll make the big cars with the big profit. This is true.
All right, yeah, that's true. But I think, first, not only GM high executive was having time to having big war, but that affected even the morale of the workers themselves. Why? Because that was the beginning of the drug age, and all these guys over the weekend had a whole big drug party. The old joke? Old joke was that never buy a car from GM and that was made on Monday. Because these guys still didn't wake up from the drug party. Made so many mistakes. You didn't know that?
I knew that one.
So, never buy a car. But do you know what happened? Of course, all that sluggishness, that low inefficiency, and all of that was completely driven out by the Japanese competition. Without Japanese competition, American motor market was completely was on the brink of just chaos. And the same thing over Japan. German competition too. So this is very surprising. What was surprising is that when by the time Japan came in with the Toyota and all the stuff, this is amazing because GM market is supposed people within 1 year, 2 years, you have a trouble, major trouble in a new car. But Japanese brought it. The other day I was talking about. I had Nissan way back 1960s, and I had that Nissan for 200,000 miles without going to a single time to a repair shop. 200,000 miles. And way back when I was, before you were born in 1950, American cars, if you look at the odometer, the highest number you could get was 99,000 miles. They never know odometer had more than 100,000 miles. Now when you move a car, you got 100,000 miles, but in those days, only 99,000 miles, because not many people drove even half of it. They usually drove about 50, 60,000 miles, then they trade in. Still, we talk about, that's 50,000 mile warranty. That comes from those days. It's 50,000. So this was a fantastic turnover. What was that? By the time Japan came with the Toyota, all the stuff, many Americans talked about, gee, this is the second Pearl Harbor. They are really invading really American companies, GMs and Motor. You guys, have you seen those pictures of the Detroit motor factory that's all abandoned now? It's all abandoned now. Rows and rows of factories. And so don't look at it. When you see all those pictures of abandoned factories and windows are going on, it looks like the
just like a picture of the Pearl Harbor after Japanese attack. It's all demolished. But the difference was that. Difference was this one. You see, in the Pearl Harbor attack, they took out the Pacific, U.S. Pacific Fleet, and in fact, by the second Pearl Harbor really attack, Japan took out GM and Ford. Of course, GM and Ford have survived as company, but if you look at any product or any cars made at GM and Ford, you will see, if you open up, who examine closely, most of the parts made outside this country. They are simply assembly. So this is the difference. So the second Pearl Harbor, what is amazing is that all now really put the GM on the and Ford on the brink of bankruptcy, and Chrysler was really bankrupt. It was barely saved by congressional act. But what is amazing?
A lot of this had to do with the oil price.
What's that?
What made Japanese cars so appealing was the oil prices of the 70s.
Yeah, well, it's still appealing. Oil price is gone. It's still appealing, and no.
But I mean, they wouldn't have cut out. Americans loved their big cars, but they were forced to switch.
Yeah, well, I don't know. That's only an incidental problem because the oil crisis lasted only a few years, and that.
Didn't last 10
the whole appeal to the Japanese car was already building up before the case. You see, not only I'm talking car alone, but many other things. Look at all the electronic equipment, like Walkman, all that, Nintendo, all that stuff.
Television.
Yeah, television. How about television? It has nothing to do with the oil industry, all kind. I'm talking about not only, I'm taking car as an example, but I'm talking all across the board. TVs and all that stuff, Yeah. And as you may know, as you may know, but by doing so, this was a paradox. In other words, Japanese industry appeared to inflict a great damage on American industry, but it really revitalized it. This is what I mean. Really put back the efficiency back. And I'll give you another example. Another example was the steel industry. The steel industry was one of the biggest industries in America, the steel. And your father worked with a steel company, right? But Korea took over. It became a major steel producer. And the other day, Vietnam Steel was closing up. It's almost closing down. And I was on the news. In the heydays, Vietnam Steel employed about 300,000 people. Now it's down to about 20,000 people. Just imagine from 3,000 to 20,000. That's not the only thing. The big problem was that Vietnam had a long-standing pension program for all the previous workers. Now it becomes so small, they simply break it off. No more pension. And that leaves all the old work retirees in the cold. How terrible that is. Then I'll give you one more example. And that was one example that this is again the devastating. But the Koreans are not in anywhere as good as Japanese. Koreans are playing the second and third fiddle. But the steel industry they did. Another industry Korea did was that in England and Korean shoe industry came up and just completely destroyed British shoe industry. Completely, it's gone. Then another industry that Koreans did was that in demolishing was the shipbuilding, building big ships. So I'm just giving you the whole example. So here we have a very interesting example of whole prediction come up and it really doesn't come up. So there are two elements, two features in Marx's work. One is the description of the capitalism, how it grows. It's just fantastic. But then the second one is the prediction of what's going to be like when we have the proletarian revolution. That's not descriptive, because after all, there is no way of describing the future. It's only a prediction. And why in the world that prediction is went wrong, we'll talk about that later. But let's get back to Marx and Communist Manifesto. So let's go to, and I tell you, the Communist Manifesto was written 1848, and Marx was only 30, he was a young man. And I have to say that of all Marx writings or prose, this is about the best. It's not so rambling. You see, you notice that it's not so rambling as German ideal. German ideal, you don't know where he was going, he was coming from. But here is a really crisp. And it really sums up the whole evolution of bourgeoisie. Yeah?
Right.
What?
Better prose.
Huh?
Better prose.
Better what?
Prose.
Oh, prose. Yeah, you think you like that better?
Right.
That's all right, but I like this one better. Yeah, but let's go to the hook. Part one is his description of bourgeoisie. That let's go to page 159, and he talks about how bourgeoisie developed from bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie means the old guild, the burghers. The burg, you know what burg means, by the way? Brook. Anybody who knows German? You know German.
Well, the townspeople, aren't they?
The brook means what?
The middle class sort of merchants.
Brook is
I thought it means townspeople.
Brook.
Townspeople.
Brook means what?
Castle.
Huh?
Castle.
Or it's a castle. Brook originally means mountain. Mountain wall castle. That's why it's up there. And the castle, around the castle, town was built. And the bourgeoisies are the people who, burghers are people who live in the city. This all right? That's bourg. All right, that book comes out. Then let's move to 160. And he says in the first paragraph, the feudal system of industry is closed guild. It's a closed market. That's what I know. Closed market. Then the next paragraph, he says, meantime, markets kept ever growing demand, ever rising. And I use the word elastic. See, when you talk market, closed and open is one thing. Then another point is inelastic is different. Inelastic means that when the price goes down, supply goes up. When the price goes up, the supply shrinks. That is, the domain of the size of the market is like a rubber band. That's the elastic market. On the other hand, when the price goes up, comes down, the market size still remains about the same. That's inelastic. And all the local market was primarily inelastic. Why is that so? Because local market, feudal market was selling primarily the necessities of life, like your bread. See, when you buy your bread, it's very hard to say, I better buy less amount because the price is going up, because the amount you need is fairly fixed. But on the other hand, look at your Christmas shopping. Remember last year, Christmas season said, Christmas shopping was bad because the economy was bad. See, Christmas shopping, why? Because the things you buy for Christmas shopping are not necessary items. They are the luxury items. And that one goes up and down. That's elastic. So the bourgeoisie market, really, let's consider this point again. So when we talk about you stack up the things you need, you don't need. And some of them are really attractive, you need it. But a lot of other stuff you go up, like TVs and hi-fi set, all that stuff is up there. That's not really necessary. This is necessity. And we call it unnecessary before. See, bourgeoisie market not only expand in terms of geographically, but really extend some of this. And that's why when you go to any stores now, Sears or whatever store, just you go around. And one day I was just going around with my wife. You look at hundreds of items, and 99 out of 100, you don't really need it. Joe the other day he told me an interesting story. He said, said, in bourgeoisie, in capitalism, is there something terribly cruel about it? Why? Because there are a lot of things, I don't need, and yet I am induced to develop a desire to buy. Yeah. That induction of the desire, that's exactly what the expression of marketing is. But you cannot do that with the necessities. With the necessity, there's no room for talking about induction. Nobody's going to advertise that. You guys are going to have to buy eggs and chicken. Yeah. All right. So you have that inelastic market is a whole expensive market, and so he's talking about that part. That is ever rising, and then finally the market expense. So market expense in two ways: horizontally in terms of scope in that area, then vertically in terms of increasing the things you don't need. Then the double expansion. And by doing so, eventually the third paragraph, you say, modern industry has established a world market for future discovery of America, so on. Then we go to the next paragraph. So we see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie itself is the product of long course of development, and that's true, right? Then he goes on. What is amazing thing is that talk about a whole cultural transformation. George, would you please go page 161, that the one sentence paragraph, you see.
The bourgeoisie historically has played a most revolutionary part.
This is an important part, you see. Everybody is aware of Marx talk of proletarian revolution. But before he talk about proletarian revolution, he's going to say, I'm going to tell you what a wonderful revolution bourgeoisie made. Very few people are aware of it. And by the way, from that line on, he's going to praise the great revolutions bourgeoisie made. And Katie, you tell me, in that play, Shakespeare play Julius Caesar, how does it go? Something like that. Brutus said, I didn't come here to praise Caesar, but bury. How does it go?
I came to bury Caesar, not to praise.
Yeah. But you remember that one? But then it's almost like I don't. Marx is saying that I didn't come here to.
Praise. You didn't come here to praise the bourgeoisie,
I didn't come here to bury bourgeoisie, but to praise the bourgeoisie. So, yeah, that was the idea. All right. George, you know my point. Yeah, George, you read the next paragraph. Yeah.
The bourgeoisie, whoever has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless and infeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation.
Do you know that one paragraph describes a drastic cultural transformation under bourgeoisie? So how would you describe, Teddy, this cultural transformation? Under feudalism, our social relation is more or less natural. That's used the word natural, don't you know? Natural superiors. And in most part, the relation of father and children, parents and children, and siblings, and they are the working unit. But when you go into the factories and corporations, your neighbor is not your natural neighbor. It's a total stranger. Just imagine again yourself working in a southern plantation. Again there, of course the slaves are slaves, but still natural in one regard, because they were born into the same plantation. They grow up there as a little kid. That natural tie is gone. Then, but in the modern corporation, you don't really go out there because I'm not going to work with him because he's my brother or neighbor. But the neighbor is again natural relation, because in the old villages, neighbors are usually kin, relatives. They grow up together. They share blood. But here, the only relation you have, modern factory and corporation is a money relation. It's a money relation. So artificial. And as a matter of fact, in the rural world, the so-called agricultural world, the money doesn't play any role whatsoever. Very minimal role. Because they produce most of the stuff they have. Then look at again the religion. You grow up with the religion. All that stuff. No, that's all gone. Read the next paragraph, John.
Bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe.
How about that one? That it has a strip of every occupation on any halo. See, in the old feudal world, whether you're a baker or a tailor, everybody thought their profession is something holy, something sacred. There's sanctity. But no, now we don't. Now we're only concerned is about how many dollars I get paid for it.
But doesn't that itself confer, like on Bill Gates or something like that, a metaphysical, like supervening aspect of it, in the sense that he's worth billions and billions of dollars?
But he commands it by virtue of the dollars, not by virtue of his work. That's the thing. Surely he has power, but the question is, how does he command that respect and power? By virtue of money. But medieval people didn't do it. And I'll give you another example. In the medieval town, some of the doctors were there, and they got paid in cash because most of the patients didn't have the cash to get paid. Sometimes they get paid just in kind, loaf of bread and sack of flour. And yet, he commanded a great deal of respect. And the other day, one of my children is a doctor. He said, "Do you know?" He said, "Doc, now the application to medical school has gone down drastically for the past few years. Why? Because they are no more than HMO employees. They cannot even prescribe the doctor best medication they want to. Why? Because it's controlled by HMO. The doctors are no longer real here. About lawyers, no more, but they are crooks anyway. Yeah. So they see the whole cultural, and this is why I'm telling you, Marx is not solely concerned with economic affairs. He really is concerned with the whole transformation of cultural nature. Remember last time Jonathan King was surprised. Told me, said, "Gee, I didn't know Marx was so much interested in ideas." Yeah, you remember he said that ruling ideas of every age is the ideas of ruling class. And last time also I want to remind you people that he said his materialism is different from Feuerbach's. Don't you remember? According to Feuerbach's materialism, just matter. Well, this is made of matter. Your brain is of matter, and your consciousness is an offshoot of that matter. That's the end of it. But that's not the way Marx was taught. He wants to say that the materials he's interested in is not the chemical matter, physical matter, but the matter that's in the social methods of production. For example, capitalism. To say that material conditions of capitalism means that you cannot divorce ideas from that kind of materialism. Because without ideas, idea of free market, idea of employee, capital, labor, the idea of free market make no sense. That's another way of talking about that. His materialism has a built-in set of ideas. This is what makes his materialism different from Feuerbach's materialism. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to portray economic viability and for people like, people of science, poets, etc. I mean, to have such an extremely negative view of it is...
Negative view of what?
Have an extremely negative view of economic viability, which is what he does. I mean,
hold on one second.
I mean, it's just as easy to take a positive view of it if you don't deconstruct everything to the extent that he does. You
What do you
know?
mean by deconstructing? You know, deconstructing.
I mean, all of these ideas of alienation and surplus value, and all by segmenting everything the way he does. It's what makes it possible for him to look at it negatively. I mean, it's just as easy to see it in a positive way. I can see seeing the factory environment as being something, you know, less than, you know, is something that needs to be changed. But I don't understand seeing the entire economic viability of society as something regressive instead of progressive. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
What do you mean by economic viability?
I mean, the fact that he's talking about how the fact that people are able to be economically viable because of a market that's operating, so to speak, in a society, you know, including people like scientists and poets. I mean, why is this a bad thing, is what I'm saying. Why is it a corruption or something, rather than, why can't it be seen in a positive light?
Hold on a second. Does he ever use the word corruption?
Well, he portrays it as corruption
No,
of value.
again, this is
As
one
a-
thing
as a complete
I want to learn from my
commercialization of
class.
value.
Never put the word he ever uses into his mouth. In fact, he never used the word corruption.
Well, I mean, they're no longer honored or looked up to with reverent awe, right? They're stripped of their
Yeah, but
they're,
is that-
they're
that-
defrocked.
That's ridiculous.
I know, but is
They
that
are-
is that
they
a
are
corruption?
for what
Is that a
they are.
corruption?
It clearly has a negative
Less
ring.
pure than it was before, right?
Look here. He said,
they haven't become
bourgeois,
corrupt,
you know,
but they've been
bourgeoisie
corrupted.
has done all that stuff because of feudalism. According to, remember again, let's go over again. This was one point we had. After all, the idea, all these professions are sacred. Is that really the natural condition of those institutions? Or is that something that feudalism introduced by its own mechanism? This is the biggest question for you guys to face. Surely, you know, he took away, you said, bourgeoisie took away the appearance of halo from the older profession. But where does the halo, the appearance of halo came into being, according to Marx? It was introduced by feudalism. It's not there in the nature of things. You know, on the other hand, if it's there in the nature of things, then bourgeoisie comes along and rips away, then bourgeoisie is really destructive, you can say. But not corruption again. The word is not a corruption. Corruption is an entirely different meaning. What corruption we mean when feudalism goes on and they really are supposed to live up to certain idea of loyalty. Remember loyalty was the one? But they don't live up to it. Then we say the feudalism has corrupted. That's what corruption means. Suppose we know we have a bureaucracy here, federal government, and they are supposed to be honest, but they take bribe, and the police take bribe. Then we call it's a corruption. That is, corruption means that whenever a certain social institution cannot live up to its own standard of honor and code, then we call corruption. But on the other hand, some external force comes along. Come on, you guys. By the way, you know, therefore the whole corruption can take place in even mafia, because mafia have their own honor code, and they may be cheating on that honor code. Then they are corruption. But on the other hand, now suppose someone comes up, police comes up, you mafioso, I'm going to get you and destroy you guys. Surely that's not corruption. So we have to understand what corruption means.
Well, there's a broad thing with corruption.
I know.
We say governments today are corrupt. That I mean, in Latin America, they don't have principles necessarily that they're subscribed.
So they are corruption because they are not living up to their own standard. That's why it's called
No, we're
corruption.
not living up to our standards.
Not our standard. No, none whatsoever. If they didn't have the standard whatsoever, we have no right to call them corrupted. I'm just telling you, this is the important part. If they had not their own standard, and they are really okay by their own standard, it's just presumptuous for us to say that they are corrupt.
Well, I mean, the word corrupt isn't important. What I'm trying to say
Yeah.
is that he's portraying this is a negative phenomenon.
Well, that's all right, but you're negative, all right. And to say that negative, that's a very, very ambiguous word. Deconstruct, negative, they're all very, very flimsy words. But at the moment, we are, okay, Andrea, let's just clearly look at this one. He is really describing what the wonders the bourgeoisie has done. So when you talk about all these halos and you say, oh yeah, that was wonderful stuff, but it's gone, then you say that's negative. But on the other hand, you say, look here, I tell you, these guys thought it was a wonderful stuff, and to be a baker, and to be a doctor, and they no longer think of money as the only value, then that's really corruption. But bourgeois is saying that, no, it's not a corruption. We are simply destroying their old values because that's the value instituted by the old order. I'll give some simple example again. Simple example is that Korea had a dynasty until end of 19th century. And the people were taught to be loyal to the king, to worship the king, and to admire the king, and all that stuff. And then the democracy comes along. Are you kidding? I mean, they worship the king. They are biggest parasite. Get rid of them. Send him to guillotine. That's nothing negative about it. Unless what you already presuppose all the value is the right value.
I think one of the most conspicuous examples of capitalism as desacralization, I guess, is in the art world. I mean, there's a joke to the effect that the definition of high culture is somebody who can listen to the William Tell overture without once thinking of the Lone Ranger. And I guess that it would be a rare individual who could look at a masterpiece by Van Gogh, for example, without thinking.
What's it?
I mean, it's impossible now to visit a gallery and to contemplate some masterpiece without wondering how much is this worth, how much money did this last go for. So the aesthetic merit of the painting, whatever that is, becomes subservient to its value on the art market. I just think it's a very clear example of this sort of thing.
In other words, okay, then in order to change all values in the book and the most value, surely in a sense that's negative in that case, you say. And surely that's true. And nobody's going to dispute it. But at the same time, how many of us really value the work of art for its own sake? Very, very few. Very, very few people.
Wait, I don't know. What's your point?
No. In other words, to see no more than monetary value in a work of art looks like really desacralizing the work of art. But what I meant to say was that on the contrary, you see, how many people, even in the feudal days, really recognize aesthetic value as the super monetary value?
I can't speak too confidently for feudalism, but I do think there's something intelligible about the idea that if you pick up on this fact, say, and art is I think an obvious one, but to me probably less important than maybe some of the things Marx is describing. But it does seem that is a cultural phenomenon, that our attitudes now towards our relations and our social position and the things that we do with our free time, for instance, are colored by the attitudes and dispositions that are useful given the social sort of system that we live in, and that it doesn't seem too outlandish to take a step back and reflect and say that perhaps for whatever reason, I mean, you're certainly making use of other values in order to do so, but to say that that's a problem.
But
so I don't know. I mean, it's right. I think it's fine to say how many people in feudalism did, but that doesn't get us out of the evaluative question to pose to ourselves, which is this a valuable thing that happened or not?
Well, the question you are saying that really our evaluation and attitude approach is really colored by the social system we are living in, and that is, of course, Marxism. That's what he's saying. business
Except when
line.
it's not.
But that,
Except when it's not. That's the problem, right? I mean, it seems pretty clear, right? And it seems clear from the example that you gave of how, doctors are becoming employees of HMOs. And you very well could have gone on to say, and isn't that bad, right? I mean, we all think that's bad. And yet, and it seems like we're free to say that despite the fact that, we're in this, system that's supposed to have already made doctors sort of these deposed, defrocked. I mean, this isn't feudalism anymore, right? So what's so bad about doctors being employees of HMOs?
well, again, you're saying, bringing up the same problem. In other words, that's exactly what Andre's point, see, in other words, we'll talk about that is that surely we brought the doctors, made doctors into merely wage earners, and you're saying that, what is wrong with it?
Well, I'm saying there's something wrong with it, but how is it that I can think that if I'm immersed in capitalism or whatever?
Right, it's a question.
Oh,
of
it- well,
degree. It's a question of degree.
I mean,
Marx is romanticizing professions in sort of a flaky way, in my opinion. What's the point of romanticizing scientists and saying that, if they're
Well, he doesn't know what romance
altruistic
is
and doing
later.
something for no monetary, for not being economically viable, it's a positive thing for scientists.
But the notion of a concrete
But I mean,
praxis.
America represents an extreme commercialization of value today, in my opinion, and it is extreme and it's bad. But I would say there are degrees of it, I think America is an extreme. Unfortunately.
I have a question. I just agree with the Marx criticism of the capitalism, the bourgeoisie revolution, the revolution. But you said that there is positive aspect of it. So what's the positive aspect?
The positive aspect is that people are able to own a home, perhaps. I mean, a scientist might be able to own a home as well as have, respect at the university, maybe eat a little better.
Okay, even if there is
I guess
a
the great
positive
outdoors.
aspect, still the Marx
Quality of
criticism.
life, simple quality of life.
Even if there is the positive aspect such that, but still Marx criticism maintains because the bourgeois revolution, there is no natural respect for the physician or lawyer, and also I think Marx doesn't agree with the feudalism. Marx doesn't agree with the capitalism, right? So he said that when he criticizes when he talk about